Let's look at some of them. A.J. Green, what are we hearing?
This is the final year of his contract in Cincinnati. Hasn't played yet this year, and obviously the Bengals season is going nowhere at 0-6. So teams have been calling to see if he's available. Again, Cincinnati is telling them no, but it gets closer and the offers get better. A lot of teams out there looking for a receiver, most prominently the New England Patriots. And if they're involved, a lot of other teams are going to be involved.
Imagine A.J. Green on the Patriots, or maybe this guy. How about Stefon Diggs in Minnesota?
Weird situation here because they're 4-2. They're not in a mode where they're going to be dumping their good players, and his contract is team favorable. But there's been some issues with him the last couple of weeks. He missed a practice. He's had some issues with some things that have been going on there. There's some chatter that maybe he doesn't love that contract he signed last summer. So it's possible, especially if they start losing a couple games here, they could look to maybe make a move that just sort of shakes things up. But they would want another asset in return that could help them this year.
Well, let's look at his season, okay? So through the first 3 games this year, Diggs had just 6 catches and 1 touchdown. But in the last 3 games, he's been completely rejuvenated. You look at the numbers. He's had more catches than he did targets. He's been spectacular and caught 3 touchdowns last week. Stefon Diggs, it feels to me, is a guy that I'm Minnesota. Why would I even be considering this? I think they look like a team that if they get things right, could make a deep run this year.
Imagine, like, that get-back game against the New York Giants did wonders for Kirk Cousins because now he goes on and completely thrashes the Philadelphia Eagles,
right,
last week. So, if I'm Minnesota right now, I should be feeling pretty good about what Kirk Cousins is doing and how he's responded to the criticism that he got from his receivers.
Yeah, Diggs ain't going nowhere. I mean, they honestly, Minnesota, they punked Diggs in the first place when he tried to voice his displeasure, and then they fined him, and then he played, and he was like, you know what, I'm happy here. He already got punked. He's not going anywhere, and nor should he, because he balled last week, and he is a flat-out stud.
Well, you were there last week, Graziano. What were people saying?
Look, it's a little bit of a fragile situation. Had they lost that game to the Eagles, I think things would look a lot different. So think about if they lose to Detroit this week, things could start to look different. The whole division is 500 or better. They know it's going to be tough. They've already lost to the Packers and the Bears. It looks good right now. Beat up on the Giants and beat up on the Eagles defense, but it's not 100% solid.
Another big division game for them this week against Detroit. Our next stop is Cleveland. One of the biggest stories, of course, across the sport this year has been the regression of Baker Mayfield. Through 6 games, he leads the league with 11 picks. His QBR is under 40. The Browns are 2-4. They're on their bye week. Yesterday, their general manager, John Dorsey, had this to say about Baker.
I love everything about him. That hasn't changed for me one bit in terms of his competitiveness, his ability to throw the football and move his thing. What I really like is his teammates like him. I like his approach to the game of football. I like the game planning processes of that. I like how he goes out there and competes. I like his grit that he shows. I like how he throws the football. I like how he extends plays. And, again, last I looked, it takes 53 guys to put this thing together. And it's got to be 53 guys playing the game of football.
Just fascinating that here we are. We sit 6 weeks into this season with all these expectations, and after the rookie year he had last year, and the GM has to sit up there and give a voice of support, if you will, a vote of confidence for the young quarterback. But they're in their bye. We know who they play next. That's New England. Where do you think we sit right now with these Browns?
I still think the Browns are in trouble because they have a couple of issues that I don't think they'll be able to solve even after the bye. The offensive line stinks. They don't play well. And the quarterback turns the ball over a ton. Okay, so those 2 things are going to take time, but I think the Cleveland Browns have a bigger issue. It is just hard to change a culture when you've been losing for so long. Everyone was quick to anoint the Cleveland Browns as a team that's arrived, but remember, Freddie Kitchens is a guy who was a position coach, who just last season was a position coach. Now he's a head coach with one of the youngest teams in the National Football League. There are a lot of things that the Cleveland Browns have to work out.
Yeah, Woody, you hit it on the head. Winning is a muscle, Greeny, that has to be trained. You can't just acquire massive talent and assume that winning will be a byproduct. Winning's a muscle that has to be trained. But furthermore, the Browns had 6 months to fix these issues. These issues won't be fixed in 6 days. You can't fix the offensive line woes, and the offense just does not click. You have all this star-studded players. The offense just doesn't click. Thankfully, that division is not that good, so they're still in the race because they could be all the way out of it.
When teams hire coaches every January, right, they look at this, who the hot coordinator is coming in. Is it going to be an offense guy, a defense guy? Very rarely do you see a team hire this guy's going to come in and change our culture, right? Andy Reid gets let go in Philadelphia. 2 days later, he's coaching the Chiefs. Look how that works out. The Browns believed and believe that Freddie Kitchens can be that kind of guy. but he hasn't proven it. He's never done it before. So you have a quarterback that's never done it before, a coach that's never done it before, and it starts there. Talking to people in that organization, they're all saying the same thing. We need more consistency. We need the roller coaster ride to stop. We need more from our guys. They still believe it's a group that can contend and win, but it's one that hasn't proven that yet.
I'll just keep saying it. Think how different the conversation would be all week long if the Ravens were 5-1.
Yep.
Or if Ben didn't get hurt and the Steelers were 5-1.
Right.
The fact that the division has not run away from them, I think, has kept things at a low boil, at a simmer, if you will.
And they beat the Ravens. So
and they beat Baltimore in that huge, again, that I called franchise, renewing, or whatever it was. Whatever it was, I was obviously as wrong as a person could be. Next up is the NFL owners' meetings, where the commissioner, Roger Goodell, revealed yesterday at the conclusion of the meetings that a 17-game regular season is part of the conversations about a new CBA. He didn't go into a lot of details, but there's a lot to talk about.
We've had very fruitful discussions on it, discussing the positives and negatives, the changes to the game that we've made over the last 10 years, which I think are really important as it relates to the safety of the game and how we're preparing and practicing and training our players. And I think those changes have made a significant impact in a positive way. And so that is something that we'll continue to discuss, and it may or may not be part of whatever we ultimately decide.
Okay, so this to me is fascinating. Dan, I want to start with you from the information piece of this, because this is a somewhat precarious time in these conversations, and this is a big deal.
Yeah, we've reached the point where it's kind of an important, critical time for these CBA negotiations, if they are to get done during the season, which is the hope from both sides. Now we know, we've known for a while, the owners are pushing for an expanded season, a 17-game season. The questions remain, how would that work? The owners haven't figured that out yet. There isn't a proposal that would be like, oh, this is exactly how it would work. There's discussions, right? You have your bye leading into the Thursday game, season goes to mid-February, et cetera. They also haven't figured out, more importantly, how much it's going to cost them in terms of what they have to give the players to agree to it. The players want a larger share of the revenue pie in exchange for exposing their bodies to this 17th game, and at this point, those numbers have not matched up.
D-Wood, you played how many years?
12.
Are you in favor of the idea of adding a regular season game?
Hate it. I hate it. I'm more of a traditionalist type of guy. And I just go back to what Mark Cuban had said about the NFL before. He said that pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. And what he means by that, it just seems like NFL is a beautiful game as it is. It's the #1 sport in this country. And it seems like the NFL just keeps tinkering and keeps doing these things. Well, you don't really need to mess up the golden goose in this particular situation. For me, this has nothing to do with player safety, because we all know that players, you throw enough money at them, they'll go the extra mile. I just don't like the NFL keep tinkering when something is still good.
D-Wood, to your point, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. The NFL, the 16-game regular season, it's not broke, so there's no point in trying to adjust it as it stands. And then, as you also said, players right around week 11 and week 12, fans don't realize this, but players are human. They're sitting at their locker green and they're like, man, how many more games we got left? As soon as you start to add more games, the product will become watered down and each game will mean less and the product will not be as good. There's just no point in trying to do it.
Look, there have been 20 weeks on the NFL schedule, one way or another, for a very long time. There used to be 6 preseason games and 14 regular season games. They changed that in the late 70s. This would probably mean removing an exhibition game and all the rest of that. Dan, how would you assess the likelihood this gets done?
I think there's a strong likelihood, but it's important for people to understand that the owners are not 32 united minds on this. And there are owners that would rather keep it the way it is and not have to give back all that money to the players. And so they have to figure all that out for themselves before they get back to the bargaining table.
Possibility of a 17th game. Maybe there's one that they move all over the place. Very interesting stuff. We are very busy, as you can tell, on this Thursday morning with our breaking news and much more. Coming up, Sunday's marquee NFL game, Dak against Carson. Which quarterback would you take? We had a spirited discussion yesterday. We'll see what these guys think today. And we cannot take our eyes off Zion when he's on the court. Is he the most captivating athlete in sports today? That question and more answered on the way. Get Up on ESPN.